Welcome back, everyone. Our next panel is on data quality and online panels, and our session chair is Jeremy Burke. So, Jeremy.
Thanks, Tara. Hi, everyone. So I said I'm Jeremy, and I'm happy to moderate this session on data quality and online panels. We'll have three presenters. We'll go sequentially in order on the slide. I think after each presentation, if the presenters are willing, we'll have questions immediately afterwards. And then if there are some time left at the end, and there's questions for the presenters as a whole, we can discuss those perhaps at the end of the session. So without further ado, our first presenter will be Kyle Berta from SSRS. Kyle is a research director at SSRS with expertise in quality-based methodologies such as ABS and RDD that utilize web, phone, and/or mail modes. He has extensive experience in quick turnaround media polls, web tracking surveys, omnibus polling, and particularly specializes in work on quality-based panels. And we'll be discussing his work on offer they can't refuse, evaluating engagement techniques among chronic non-responders in probability panels. Kyle, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. So my name is Kyle Berta. I'm a research director here at SSRS. As Jerry mentioned, I'll be talking about evaluating engagement techniques among chronic non-responders and probability panels. So as we all know, the pandemic has accelerated the adoption of online and mixed mode data collection, particularly for probability-based online panels. As such, the need to explore non-response and strategies to combat non-response, particularly among chronic non-responders, has never been greater. Re-engaging these chronic non-responders can benefit the representativeness of a probability panel and save on costs associated with new recruitment. So this presentation is broken up into 4 parts. The first, we define who are chronic non-responders. Then I'll talk a little bit about the demographics of these chronic non-responders. Afterwards, I'll talk a little bit about an experiment we're doing to re-engage these people. And lastly, I'll share some preliminary results on some tracking we're doing for these re-engaged chronic non-responders. Everything I talk about in this presentation was conducted on the SSRS opinion panel, which is a probability-based, nationally representative online panel, multimode panel, where internet respondents are reached via web and non-internet respondents or web-reluctant respondents are reached via phone. And we primarily recruit via ABS address-based sample. So first, what are chronic non-responders? So non-response can occur at 2 places during the recruitment cycle for a probability panel. First, when the respondent is presented with the offer to join the panel and they decline to join. Also, when a respondent joins the panel and goes through panel registration, only to never respond to any of our survey invitations. That's who we're defining as chronic non-responders. More specifically, the SSRS opinion panel defines chronic non-responders as responders who join the panel but do not complete any surveys after at least 6 invitations. So who are these chronic non-responders? The table here in the first column, you'll see the demographic proportions for our panel as a whole compared to the demographics for our chronic non-responders. Compared to the total population, these chronic non-responders are on average younger, less educated, and not white. As many of us know, these groups also happen to be the hard to recruit population. So re-engaging them is paramount to maintaining panel representativeness. We also looked at gender and party ID, and we actually didn't find any significant differences between our total panel proportions and our chronic non-responders. So next I want to talk about an experiment we did re-engaging chronic non-responders via new modes. We wanted to determine whether chronic non-responders are a lost cause or if they can be quote unquote re-engaged and begin taking surveys. We want to test whether chronic non-responders can effectively be reached via alternate modes, in this case, sending them a letter in the mail as opposed to the typical email invitations they get. We also wanted to make them a quote unquote offer they can't refuse to take the survey to get a sense of whether they are just not getting our invitations or if they just need more incentive. So we took our chronic non-responders and broke them into 3 experimental groups. The first were mailed the invitation. So these are ones getting contacted by a new mode. We offered them a higher $20 incentive, and in the letter, we promised a short 5-question survey. So it's really enticing. You know, $20 for a super short survey is a pretty good deal if you ask me. The rest of the sample were broken into 2 email groups, one getting a higher incentive and one getting a more typical $5 incentive. So here were our results. As you can see, the group 1, the mailed group, had a 31% response rate to the mailed invitation, while the email groups, the higher were much lower. The $20 email group had a 2.8% response rate, and the $5 email group had a 1.7% response rate. So this shows us that panelists contacted via new mode, which is mail, had a significantly higher response rate than email communications. Among the emailed respondents, those who were offered a higher incentive did have a higher response rate, but overall the rate was still very low, so we wouldn't consider it very effective. One thing we looked at between the 2 email groups was the open rate, and we didn't find any significant differences in open rate between the 2 incentives. We also wanted to make sure, because time has gone by, whether or not their emails and their mailing addresses were still actually valid. And it seems that's the case because only 3% of emails bounced back and only 4% of letters came back as undeliverable. Looking a little deeper at the demographics of the experiment. So I added a 3rd column that shows the demographics of those who actually completed the experimental survey. And as you can see, the response rate for the 18 and 29 group was lower than the sampled rate, but it was comparable to what we get during actual recruitment. The experiment did skew towards attracting higher education type panelists, but the valuable less than high school group was captured at a higher rate than our typical recruitment rate. We also noticed that response rate among Black panelists was particularly high, and then for Hispanics, it was low compared to the sampled rate, but still higher than our recruitment rate. So some takeaways. Engaging chronic non-responders via email isn't very effective regardless of the incentive. A higher incentive may improve engagement among these panelists who open the email, but the overall low response rate indicates that many people are just not opening or seeing the email, and this could be because they're purposely ignoring them. They are never seeing them because they have spam filters, or they're just generally inattentive to that email address, or they just don't recognize the sender anymore. But contacting these chronic non-responders via mail is an effective and efficient tool to engage them. And what you can do is leverage this mail contact to solicit feedback about the panel, update their information like their email address, or give them instructions on how to make sure their email invitations are being properly delivered. Contacting them via mail also just simply reminds the panelists that we exist and that they signed up and that they can trust future communications that they see from us. Lastly, I want to touch real quick about what we're doing to track these re-engaged panelists. So these people took our experimental survey, they got paid for it, but if they don't then start taking more surveys from us, then it was kind of a waste. So once a chronic non-responder is re-engaged, we want to measure whether they actually become an active member of the panel and respond to future email invitations. Obviously, not all survey invitations are as enticing as the engagement experiment was that had, especially if they had the high incentive short questionnaire. So we want to know, like, will these chronic non-responders pull, hit and run, take that survey, and then never take a survey again? So what we've done is begun inviting these re-engaged panelists from the experiment to surveys and tracking their response rates. And the early results are very promising. After completion of the experiment, the re-engaged panelists were invited to 2 different surveys over a 1-month period. And 53% of those chronic non-responders did end up taking at least one of the 2 surveys, and 37% responded to both surveys, which we think is very encouraging considering that these folk had never even responded to any of our surveys after recruitment. So our conclusions, chronic non-responders in probability panels skew towards typical hard-to-reach populations, such as those who are young, have lower education, or are non-white. Chronic non-responders can effectively be reached via mail, which gives panels the opportunity to re-engage these panelists via incentives or just reminding them of their membership. The early results are promising that chronic non-responders can become active panelists after they are re-engaged. And all this is to say that re-engaging chronic non-responders improves representativeness of a probability panel in a more efficient manner than just conducting new recruitment. That's it. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Great, thanks, Kyle. Now you can move to the Q&A session for Kyle. Please, you can either type your question into the chat, or also feel free to raise your hand and we can do things verbally. Any questions for Kyle? Maybe I can get us started with one question. So have you tried, or are you aware of any other potential methods to try to engage non-responders? So one thought I had is might be particularly effective for younger cohorts is potentially text message reminders or reaching out to text if you of course have phone numbers, which would be obviously a prerequisite, but maybe that would be more salient than an email or even potentially a mail to their home for those younger potential respondents.
Yeah, so for the SS recipient panel, we do actually in their recruitment ask they consent to receive text message reminders, and it is part of our typical survey invitation protocol. So those who have consented or did consent during recruitment would have also, in addition to the emails, been getting text messages from us. So for this experiment, contacting via text message really just more the same for them. So it was the mail that was truly a different mode of contact.
Interesting. Marco?
Yeah, hi Kai, thanks for the presentation. So my question is, do you have a sense of whether the re-engagement is short-term or medium long-term? Meaning, are these people kind of gaming the system, getting the incentives that you promise in the letter that you send and then disappear again?
So that's what we hope to track going forward. So the results showed the end were for the first 2 surveys they were invited to. We conducted this experiment in December, and we started inviting them to more surveys in January. So we hope to keep tracking that over time and also expand the outreach of this mail contact.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Paul, would you like to jump in?
I was working with the Social Research Center in Australia on their Life in Australia panel. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we had a paper at APOR about what we called dozers, sleepers, and comatose, which is 3 different versions of your chronic non-responders. And I noted you didn't test any phone follow-up with people. We found phone follow-up the most effective. And I recall some work I did close to 8 years ago with Amerispeak that we found phone follow-up, even those people that are used to only communicating with you via email or on the web, occasionally like to get phone calls from human beings. At least that's what we found. So was there an aversion that you had to testing phone calls as part of your methods?
No, we haven't tested that. I could definitely see, because that kind of follows into the pattern of just contacting them in a new way, that being effective. We do have phone numbers for a good deal of our panels, so it is something we can try. I know there is cost considerations, the cost of dialing these people, but I could definitely see that following the same pattern as mail, where just reminding them we exist and reminding them that they signed up and reminding them that they can look for emails from us is a big help.
Yeah, and I also recall now that we had what you would call a bonus condition, where if you responded to 3 future surveys in a row, you got an extra bonus. And that had some positive effect.
That's interesting. That's good to know.
Interesting. I was going to ask the same thing about stringing incentives along for incentivizing consecutive completions. That's an interesting idea. Martin also had the same question about whether you tried phone in the chat. I think we're about at time for this presentation. So thanks so much, Kyle.
Yep.
If there's time at the end,